afternoon. This is Bob Gorley with Leroy Tabler. We are trying to correct what happened. Anyways, if you like these type of interviews, please subscribe to Bob's Truth Seekers. We enjoy talking to people and getting some education from our people from around here. So, okay, we were talking about Zachariah Brown, and we get cut off. So go ahead, talking about Zachariah Brown.
Okay, Captain Brown was the 148th Pennsylvania Volunteers. Anyway, they were among those chosen to try to literally undermine the location of Confederate troops near Petersburg, Virginia. And the idea was to undermine them, cause a massive explosion, and hopefully make it possible for the northern troops then to get in control of the Confederates in that area. The siege of Petersburg had gone on for some period of time, and it was one of the latter major battles of the Civil War, because it wasn't a long time after that the Confederates finally came to the realization that they needed to do something to end the war, because they knew that they were being overwhelmed by northern resources, the number of northern troops. Of course, the North produced a lot more of the weaponry for the war than the Southerns did. The Southerners had to rely a lot on what they could import from somewhere in Europe or whatever, but they didn't have the production capability, nor did they have the manpower that the North had. So after that explosion, which actually didn't go as they had planned, it was during that period of time that Captain Brown was cited for his leadership with his troops trying to carry forth that order to explode the Confederate location and open it up for the northern troops to gain an advantage on the Confederates.
So Zachariah Brown, how many soldiers did he have with him?
I don't know the numbers he had with him. It was not a large number comparatively. I do know that the number that were actually involved was not that significant. What happened is the first time after they had tunneled under the Confederate location, the fuses were lit to cause the explosion that was to open up the Confederate location, but the fuses went out, so they had to send other men back in. Now keep in mind, a lot of the men who were involved in trying to do this for the North were men from our general area who had been coal miners.
Ah.
So they were familiar with tunneling and explosives and that sort of thing, because before the war, a lot of them had been coal miners, and they put that to use. And Captain Brown was to lead one group to try to take over the southern location after the explosion. But things didn't work out as planned, and the Southerners ended up ultimately gaining control of the location, and the North had to back off. And while this picture I showed you in the front of this book here that I had just recently got a couple months ago, the story of the 148th Pennsylvania Volunteers.
All right.
See the picture in the front of that?
There's a picture of your book right there.
I will also show you, you can't really, the camera's not on it now, but on the wall behind me is a large frame picture with this same illustration on it, and that was taken from a newspaper that was published in November 1864 of the siege of Petersburg, and this photograph is shown on that as is a photograph, individual photograph of Captain Brown. Interestingly enough, that photograph of him just identifies him as Captain Jerry Brown. That's the only time I've ever read anywhere that his name had been shortened to just Jerry.
From Jeremiah.
Jerry Brown. And of course, you and I both knew Jerry Brown, Jerry Brown,
Yes.
the grandson of Captain Brown.
Oh,
We knew him.
so he was a grandson.
Yeah,
See, I didn't know that.
yeah, he was. He was a grandson. So it's interesting that this same photograph is used in that article published in that newspaper in 1864. Our son was able to come across that photograph and the article from that newspaper of that year. So he had it framed for, and that was a Christmas gift that they gave me this year because they knew I was really into his story and the Civil War in general. I was really into that, and like I say, I think my interest in history and particularly the Civil War was sparked by that book that I had read somewhere in middle school, maybe a little bit earlier, of the that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So that got me started in history, and since that time I've collected books and read books, and probably to everybody's chagrin, maybe sometimes I have too much interest in that area and so on. But it's a fascinating thing to me, and I don't know how well even local people today are being informed of what Captain Brown had accomplished. Since that time, Clarion County has had a couple more Medal of Honor winners, and the Medal of Honor, of course, is the highest honor given for gallantry or in battle through the United States. But it was originally created during the Civil War, and initially the military was handing out too many of those awards. They found out later they had a commission that was established to review a lot of those awards, and many of the men who had originally received them had that removed from their records because the interpretation was that maybe they hadn't done anything that showed such gallantry themselves. For example, the Northern troops who were assigned to escort Abraham Lincoln's body from Washington, D.C. back to Illinois after his assassination. A lot of the men who accompanied him, all they did was accompany the body, but a lot of them had received the Medal of Honor for doing that when there was no evidence that they did anything heroic in battle. This was after that. So the Medal of Honor today is very much respected, as it should be, and the men and women who earn it are honored for their gallantry under combat conditions. And I know, Bob, that your dad was one of the ones who was wounded in battle during World War II and suffered a good bit from that. And I recall that very well. And so to have somebody honored with the Medal of Honor is distinct and should be revered by and respected by anybody who knows anything at all about the military.
You've served in various roles with the American Legion, like historian and vice president and service officer. What drives your commitment to veterans' causes?
Well, I think that if we don't remember the price that was paid for the freedoms that we have, our country's in bad shape. And I think the men and women who have served deserve to be recognized and remembered. When I went into the military, which was in 1961, the Army, the military at that time still had a draft, conscription, and I got my draft notice. I was to be drafted, and I knew I would have to respond to that draft notice, and so I, rather than accept the draft status, which meant 2 years minimum, I opted to take an extra year so I could get some specific training that I wanted when I went in, some training that I hoped would help me when I got out of the military with some civilian career. And so that's what I did. I took an extra year service, went into the military, went through Army Information School, which at that time was located in Fort Slocum, New York, so which is no longer a military installation. But I went there to Army Information School, was ultimately assigned then to Germany for the last year and a half or so of my time in the military. I served at a post in Germany, not far from the Czechoslovakian border. Back then, Judy and I were married at the time. She came over. She was able to come over then as a civilian, and she was with me then until we were reassigned to the States. And
So you were married during your time in the Army?
that's correct.
Okay.
We were married. We had no children at the time, and so I was subject to the draft. And so she came over, and she was there. Now she was a registered nurse, but she had, before she went over to Germany, she had worked at the U.S. Army Hospital in Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I was assigned. And when I went back over to Germany, she opted to come over, and she came over. And she was with me till I came back to the States. Now, the situation that took place was that we had our first son was born in July of 1964 at the Army Hospital in Nuremberg, Germany.
Oh, so you got a European son.
Beg pardon?
You have a European son.
No, well, not really. We don't, because our son that was born lived 2 days and died.
Sorry.
And the military did maybe what the military is generally not known for, and that showed compassion. They gave me the alternative to be reassigned to the States for my time that I had remaining in the military, or I could stay where I was, but she was over there without any family support there. I mean, one present in that area. And so we made a decision that I would take reassignment to the States. I had about 6 months to go. So I was reassigned then to Fort Meade, Maryland. So I came back to the States. She came back at the same time. And then we began to prepare for civilian life again. I spent my remaining time down at Fort Meade, Maryland. And then after I got done with that, I returned. I had been with the Leader Vindicator as editor, as a matter of fact. At the time, I had gone into the service. So I came back and returned to that position at that time. And so then we reestablished our family here, and consequently then later we had 2 other children, and have 2 other children, adults obviously. They're still much a part of our family, although they both live outside of our immediate area. Our son and his family live down in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, and her daughter and her husband live in Massachusetts, where they're both music educators. Our daughter teaches middle school in Massachusetts, in Reading, Massachusetts. Our son is retired from teaching after teaching music for 33 years at Mount Lebanon School District in Pittsburgh. So he after 33 years, he decided he wanted to change environments, so he resigned, retired from that, and for the last several months now, he's been teaching part-time, teaching music part-time at a Christian school down in Washington County, Pennsylvania. So he does that on a part-time basis.
Were you a musician?
Heavens no.
Were you a musician? So somehow or another, they were musicians.
We were fortunate. Both of them were very musically inclined. Judy made sure that she brought that out in them.
Good.
And it applied. They both their son and daughter went to IUP as music majors, and then they both ultimately ended up marrying other IUP grads, and so Roger and his wife Cass lived down in Bethel Park. Roger, say, taught music and still does. His wife is in human resources and has a good job in private industry. But then our daughter teaches music, as I said, up in Boston. Her husband, Rick, who's originally from New Kensington, he teaches music at Bethel. What's it called? Bethel College of Music in Boston.
I know what you're thinking of.
Yeah, I've got a
Julian.
mental block.
Okay.
So that's where our son-in-law still teaches music there in Boston. He has his doctorate and has been there to college for years now, teaching college at that level.
You've been involved in projects like the Hometown Heroes Banner Program and plans for that Veterans Memorial Park in Bethlehem. Can you tell us about how those initiatives, but how did those get started?
Well, yeah, I've been involved. We got started with the Banner Project locally through the American Legion. Our unit started about a year after Union at Reimersburg and Reimersburg Sligo area. They were the first in our immediate area to start that Banners program. The following year, through the leadership of our commander down here at American Legion, Ray Ishman, through him, he got the Banner program started, and it's been with us, I think, for like 8 years. We've had it now, and it's been a very popular thing now. As people may know, the American Legion is still involved indirectly, but there are two other organizations who are taking over the leadership of the Banner program because it was just getting a place where our American Legion needed more younger men to do the work that's required to put up those banners and take them down at the end of the season. Excuse
Berkeley
me.
College of Music.
Pardon?
Berkeley.
Berkeley College of Music in Boston. It's where our son-in-law teaches.
You often write articles for local outlets about Legion activities and flag displays. You're still doing that?
I'm not as active in the Legion now as I was. I still am involved with some activities, but not to the extent that I was. Part of it is that I can no longer do some of the things that are involvement-wise that I physically used to do. And so for years I had been part of the Legion team that does memorial services for deceased veterans at the time of interment. In fact, I recall well when your father was being laid to rest. I was on that team that was involved in paying final tribute to him out there, and I was involved in that and did that for several years. But I say I backed off some of that stuff now because I'm just not able to do it, because sometimes you're expected to go out and maybe go to a cemetery where it's not easy walking and those kinds of things, and it just made sense to me that I needed to step aside and let some of the younger men take care of that.
You've helped organize and speak at events like featuring Abraham Lincoln portrayals and Gettysburg Address readings. Why is it meaningful to bring those national stories to small towns like New Bethlehem?
I think it's important that people never forget, as I said earlier, that the price that's been paid, not only in the Civil War, but in all the wars that the United States has been involved in. And it's people need to remember that, and if people don't have an appreciation for what the price that's been paid, then we've lost a lot, and the future doesn't appear bright. So I just think it's important that we continue to do that. I've been involved with a number of things like that, telling the story of Captain Brown as an example, as I've done on more than one occasion, and some of the other activities that try to focus on the tribute that was paid by the generations of ours, but not only the generations of ours, but the ones before it. And I'm very much interested in local history, even predating the Civil War, even going back as far as the Revolutionary War.
As someone who has written and edited for years, what advice would you give to younger people interested in local history or writing or preserving their town stories?
I think it's important that schools today continue to tell the story of what our ancestors did. And somebody has to do it, and it has to go on. And fortunately, there are people around who do a good job with that, not only through the American Legion or the VFW, but in the local high school, Dr. Joe Harmon does a phenomenal job of telling the story of various military exploits. And in fact, I think it's next Monday evening, the local historical society is having a program at his center, which was down at the former First Seneca Bank here in town. The Historical Society is having Dr. Harmon in to give a presentation on the Korean War.
Oh.
So the story continues to be told. It just takes other people like Dr. Harmon and others to tell that story, because otherwise people will soon forget.
You don't hear too much about the Korean War.
No, you don't. In fact, the Korean War was not a popular war, if that makes sense. In many ways, the men didn't get honored or respected like they should have. A lot of people died there, and it was not only the Korean War that the survivors didn't necessarily get the recognition they deserved, but it also was very true of the Vietnam era, which followed that. A lot of that. I technically am classified as a Vietnam era veteran because I served during what was considered the Vietnam War era. I did not serve in Vietnam. I served in my foreign service was in Germany, and I guess there's a blessing to us in that because of my assignment to Germany. Judy was able to join me. We had a chance then to do some traveling throughout Germany, in fact, throughout Europe, during that period of time. And at that time, travel was very inexpensive when we were over there, and it was not difficult for us for me to take leave and take a week or something, and we went down into Italy or Austria or some of these other countries that we would never have been able to afford to do on our own.
Looking back, what are your most proud in terms of contributions to New Bethlehem or the Red Bank Valley area? How long were you the editor down here?
Well, it was a split time because I was editor for a period of time, for 3 or 4 years. Then I got my draft notice, so I indicated I responded to that. And then after I came back from my time in the military, I was down here from 65 to 76, 1976. I was editor again. And I left there in February of 76. I left the Leader Vindicator as editor. I left to join the staff at the Clarion County Career Center. The school, that career center, the Vo-Tech, as it was well known then, was getting ready to open, and they were staffing it, and I had applied for a position working with their adult education program, which basically involved mainly evening classes and that sort of thing, or daytime classes in the summer through the Vo-Tech. So I was actually with the Leader Vindicator probably I'm not sure. I actually joined the Leader Vindicator initially at the age of 13 when I was hired as a kid in school, hired on evenings and Saturdays for a position that was known as
Printer's Devil.
pardon?
Printer's Devil.
Oh, yeah, Printer's Devil. Yeah, that was the title, and that really meant, literally, it meant it was you were an apprentice printer, and that's how I was originally hired.
And they used to print the newspaper down here in New Bethlehem?
Oh, absolutely. They printed a newspaper when I went there. We did all the printing physically on site down there, and at that time, the Leader Vindicator probably had 20-some employees, and all the printing was done here. Not only the commercial printing for the newspaper editions, but also commercial printing was done, and so the newspaper publications were the big chore before us each week, but we've supplemented that with all the private printing that went on to meet commercial needs for printing.
We're so tickled that the Leader is still being published, because almost all the newspapers around here, they don't publish them anymore.
The Leader Vindicator is fortunate, and anybody who gets it's fortunate, because you're absolutely right. Since about the 20th of March or so, and I think that date's pretty correct, the Clarion News and the Oil City Derrick, which were both widely circulated in Clarion County,
Yes,
both of them ceased publication.
yes.
They're now doing an online publication that you can get over the internet, but there are no hard copies, if you will. No, you can't sit around and read a newspaper now. And in fact, it's not only true of those two publications, major publications in Clarion County, but it's true basically of what's happened to the print media in this country. It looks like the Post Gazette.
Yeah, the Post Gazette shut down.
It's going to be going out of business here unless they can find some way to rescue it. There's been talk about that. We'll see. But I can remember well when I was younger, we had 3 daily newspapers in Pittsburgh. We had the Post Gazette, the Press, and the Sun Telegraph. Well, all but the Post-Gazette have ceased to exist. And this is true all over the country. I mean, it's
Yes. Things have changed.
Harrisburg, for instance, Patriot News. That's major. You'd think it would be a major newspaper for the state capital, but they no longer are published every daily. You can't get them, and I terribly miss local newspapers.
Yes.
And I don't think people can really be informed about their community. And I think a community loses a lot of its identity when it loses its newspapers. And I can name you newspapers around here, all the ones I can remember when I was younger. Each community had its own newspaper, whether it was the Brockway Record or the Reynoldsville Star, all the other ones that existed at that time. And I say once a newspaper leaves a community, a lot of the community's identity is lost.
Well, when I went to college, people laughed that we had a once a week newspaper.
Right.
But it's still in existence. So, or the other ones are gone. So.
That's true, and it's true. And that's the print media nationally is in a lot of trouble, and I can't imagine that ever returning. I just can't imagine it.
It doesn't seem like it.
I just can't imagine that. And I think it's unfortunate because I don't think people are informed about their communities very well without those kind of publications. But yeah, the Leader Vindicator is the sole survivor of the print newspaper in Clarion County. And how long that'll be, I don't know, but people should be appreciative of the fact that they still have that outlet for expression and so on.
Is there anything else about your life or the area's history or upcoming community projects that you'd like people to know about? We're kind of in the wind down.
Well, as far as my life, let's be realistic. My life, most of it's behind me. I had a birthday in March, and that was coming up on the 10th of March. And people asked me, how old are you going to be? And I said, I've said this to several people jokingly, but it's true. I said, do you remember how Abraham Lincoln opened his Gettysburg Address?
80.
87 years ago.
So that's what it is.
The 10th of March was my 87 years. So I'm on borrowed time.
Well, thank you very much for this interview. I appreciate it. Anything else anybody wants to speak about? If you guys like these type of interviews, please subscribe. There's no cost. Today is May the 9th,
Right.
2026. Thank you.
You're welcome.